The 7 most high guests Johnny Carson ever had on The Tonight Show. For more than 3 decades, a simple ritual unfolded almost every night in living rooms across America. A familiar curtain, a confident stride, a desk, a smile, and a voice that millions trusted. Johnny Carson was not just a talk show host. He was the heartbeat of late-night television. Calm, witty, unshakable. Or at least, that is how it looked on camera. But behind that polished image was a reality far more unpredictable, a world where nerves, fame, pressure, and temptation quietly collided just seconds before the red light turned on. Few viewers ever imagined what was happening backstage. Celebrities at the height of their careers stood just feet away from going live in front of the largest audience of their lives. A single appearance could elevate a career overnight or damage it in minutes. And unlike today's carefully scripted interviews, Carson thrived on unscripted conversation. No safety net. No second takes. Just one chance to get it right. That pressure pushed some guests to calm their nerves in ways they probably shouldn't have. Others arrived carrying more than just confidence. And Johnny Carson, with his legendary composure, often knew the moment they walked on stage. A pause. A glance. A subtle adjustment of his cue cards. The audience at home rarely noticed. But the production team knew exactly what those signals meant. Through the years, a small number of appearances became unforgettable, not for brilliant jokes or heartfelt stories, but for behavior that left viewers confused, amused, and sometimes genuinely concerned. Laughter turned nervous. Stories wandered. Energy spiked or faded without warning. And somehow, Johnny Carson always found a way to keep the show moving, protect his guests, and preserve the dignity of live television. Tonight, we revisit 7 of the most talked about and controversial guest appearances in Tonight Show history. These moments weren't scripted. They weren't planned. And they reveal a hidden side of Hollywood during an era when fame burned hot, rules were loose, and the spotlight showed no mercy. What happens when a living legend walks on stage in a state no network executive ever wants to see? How far can professionalism stretch before it finally breaks? And how did one man manage to hold everything together without humiliating the very people who were falling apart in front of him? These are not just shocking stories. They are lessons about pressure, temptation, and the thin line between control and chaos in the golden age of television. And it all begins behind the curtain, in the quiet moments just before Johnny Carson looks into the camera and says, "Here's Johnny." Number 7. Sammy Davis Jr., the ultimate entertainer on overdrive. Sammy Davis Jr. was not just a performer, he was a force of nature. Singer, dancer, actor, comedian, and one of the most disciplined showmen ever produced by American entertainment. When Sammy stepped onto a stage, every spotlight belonged to him. And when he joined Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, audiences didn't simply expect charm. They expected excellence. One appearance in the mid-1970s delivered exactly that, but with an intensity that left even seasoned professionals quietly stunned. From the instant Sammy walked on stage, the tempo felt different. His speech moved faster than usual. His hands never stopped moving. His thoughts jumped quickly from one story to the next. He laughed, gestured, leaned forward, then back again, all in constant motion. To the audience at home, it looked like pure enthusiasm. The ultimate entertainer doing what he had always done best. But backstage, the mood was more complicated. Crew members exchanged glances. Sound technicians noticed the rapid breathing. Camera operators tracked movements that never quite settled. In the atmosphere of 1970s Hollywood, certain signs were instantly familiar. This was an era where pressure was relentless, expectations were crushing, and chemical shortcuts were often seen as part of survival. Yet something remarkable unfolded under the studio lights. Sammy never lost control. His words remained sharp. His timing stayed flawless. His jokes landed exactly where they should. His stories, though fast, never became confused. The performance felt intensified, brighter, louder, and faster than usual, but never chaotic. The energy was high, but the professionalism was higher. Johnny Carson recognized this instantly. Instead of slowing him down, Johnny adjusted the rhythm of the conversation around him. He let Sammy lead when the momentum worked. He stepped in with gentle guidance when the pace threatened to outrun the moment. It was a silent dance between two masters of live television, one fueled by boundless energy, the other anchored by unshakable calm. During a commercial break, Johnny reportedly wiped his forehead and quietly joked to the crew that simply keeping up with Sammy felt physically exhausting. That was Carson's genius. He never exposed. He never embarrassed. He adapted. What made this appearance different from others in Tonight Show history was not rumor, but results. Sammy delivered everything the audience came for: charisma, humor, precision, and star power. Whatever forces might have been at work behind the curtain, they never overpowered his discipline on camera. Carson had always operated by a quiet personal code. What a guest did before stepping on stage was their own business. But once the red light turned on, 3 rules ruled everything: respect the audience, respect the moment, and never waste airtime. Sammy Davis Jr. honored all 3. Years later, when asked indirectly about that unusually intense appearance, Sammy responded with a smile and a playful comment about the wild spirit of the 1970s. No confirmation. No denial. Just a wink at an era that burned brightly and dangerously. This was not the story of collapse. This was the rare story of a man riding the edge of excess, without losing his balance. And for Johnny Carson, that made all the difference. Number 6. Oliver Reed, The Night Control Was Lost. Oliver Reed was never built for quiet rooms. He was a towering presence in British cinema, famous for his intense performances, magnetic charisma, and a reputation that followed him long before he ever arrived in an American television studio. When Oliver Reed was booked for The Tonight Show in the mid-1970s, producers expected a bold personality, sharp stories, and just enough unpredictability to make the segment exciting. What they did not expect was how fast everything would unravel. From the moment he sat down beside Johnny Carson, something felt off. His words came out heavier than usual. His posture shifted between slumped and suddenly rigid. His eyes flashed with restless energy that didn't quite match the conversation. At first, it seemed manageable, the kind of edgy confidence that sometimes comes with strong personalities. But within minutes, the rhythm changed. Reed began interrupting questions before they were finished. His answers wandered into strange detours. He laughed at moments that didn't quite land. Then suddenly, without warning, he stood up and squared his shoulders as if preparing for a confrontation that no one else in the room could see. In the control booth, tension spiked. Camera operators tightened their frames. Stage managers moved closer to the edge of the set. For the first time that night, Johnny Carson's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. This was no longer playful unpredictability. This was volatility. Johnny immediately took control of the conversation. He stopped allowing Reed to dominate the exchange. He interrupted firmly. He redirected without smiling. The easy flow that defined Carson's interviews vanished, replaced by something sharper and more protective, not just of the show, but of the people in the room. At one point, Reed's tone grew louder. His movements became erratic. The mood in the studio changed from nervous laughter to uneasy silence. Johnny knew the line had been crossed. Without escalating the moment, he calmly steered the segment toward its end. What was scheduled as a long interview was suddenly cut short. Applause came quickly. The cameras moved on. Behind the scenes, the decision was immediate. Oliver Reed would not be invited back. For Johnny Carson, tolerance had limits. He could guide chaos. He could rescue confusion. He could soften awkwardness. But aggression, unpredictability, and loss of control in a live broadcast were lines that could not be blurred. Later, Johnny reportedly told the booking team something simple and absolute. It did not matter how famous someone was. If they could not control themselves, they would not sit at his desk. Oliver Reed joined a very short list of performers who crossed that boundary permanently. This was not a story of humor gone wrong. It was the reminder that live television is not just entertainment, it is trust. And once that trust is shaken in real time, there are no second takes. Number 5. Truman Capote, a literary genius in total freefall. Truman Capote was one of the most brilliant literary minds America ever produced. The author of unforgettable works, a cultural icon, a master of observation and language. On television, he was usually sharp, elegant, and devastatingly witty. When Truman Capote appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences expected insight, intelligence, and verbal fireworks. One night in 1980, they witnessed something else entirely. From the moment he stepped onto the stage, it was clear that this would not be a normal appearance. His movements were unsteady. His head dipped forward, then snapped back upright. When he spoke, the words came out thick, tangled, and difficult to follow. Even the audience, usually quick to laugh, grew quiet, unsure of how to respond. Behind the cameras, panic spread. Sound technicians struggled to understand him through the microphones. Camera operators avoided wide shots that revealed how unstable he looked in the chair. In the control room, producers rapidly switched to Johnny Carson's reaction shots, because at least those made sense. Johnny tried to save the moment. He simplified every question. He slowed his pace. He gave Truman time to respond. He smiled when the answers became unclear. But the more Johnny tried to guide the conversation, the more it became obvious that Capote was no longer fully present. This was not eccentric brilliance. This was incapacity. The audience watched as one of America's sharpest minds drifted in and out of awareness on live television. Laughter turned into discomfort. Curiosity shifted into concern. When the segment finally ended and the show cut to commercial, the atmosphere backstage changed instantly. Johnny Carson was furious. Not with anger on camera, he was far too professional for that, but with controlled disappointment. To him, this wasn't simply about impairment. It was about respect. Respect for the audience. Respect for the show. Respect for the moment. Capote would never appear on The Tonight Show again. The incident quietly changed how the program operated. From that point forward, guests were more closely observed before going on air. Green room access became more controlled. Subtle safeguards were put in place to prevent a collapse like this from happening again. For Johnny, there had always been a difference between someone who arrived relaxed, and someone who arrived unable to perform. Truman Capote crossed that line. This wasn't scandal for the sake of spectacle. It was a painful reminder that brilliance alone cannot save a moment when discipline disappears. A legendary mind sat at the most powerful desk in late-night television, and could no longer reach it. Number 4. Cheech and Chong, when the joke became the identity. By the late 1970s, Cheech and Chong were no longer just comedians. They had become symbols of an entire countercultural movement. Their humor wasn't built on polished punchlines or careful structure. It was built on attitude, timing, and a very specific worldview that audiences instantly recognized. When they sat beside Johnny Carson, everyone already knew what kind of energy was about to enter the room. And that was precisely the point. Unlike many guests who tried to hide what shaped their off-stage lives, Cheech and Chong made no attempt to disguise who they were. Their brand was transparency. Their comedy was identity. They didn't arrive pretending to be anything else. From the first seconds of their appearance, the contrast was unmistakable. Johnny Carson sat upright, composed, calculating every beat of the conversation. Across from him were two performers drifting comfortably through their own rhythm. Stories unfolded slowly, sometimes without clear direction. Sentences bent and circled back on themselves. Laughter arrived in unexpected places. But something fascinating happened. Johnny didn't fight the chaos. He leaned into it. Instead of trying to force structure, he became the anchor. He asked simple questions that allowed their wandering stories to land somewhere useful. When answers drifted too far, he gently pulled them back with a raised eyebrow or a perfectly timed pause. The audience quickly realized they were watching a deliberate contrast play out live. The straight man and the free spirits. At one point, during a rambling story about one of their film projects, Chong drifted into a long, disconnected explanation that seemed to confuse even his own partner. Johnny didn't interrupt. He simply watched, glanced at the camera with a subtle look of amused disbelief, and let the moment breathe. The studio erupted in laughter. Everyone was in on the joke. Cheech and Chong weren't there to be corrected. They were there to be who they were. Behind the scenes, producers understood that this wasn't a situation to be controlled, it was one to be framed. Johnny's role wasn't damage control. It was translation. He helped the audience navigate their wavelength without forcing them to change it. What made their appearances unique in Tonight Show history was this unspoken agreement. Johnny would not expose them. They would not pretend. And the audience would enjoy the contrast between order and disorder playing out in real time. Johnny Carson always believed that his job was simple: make the guest look good. With Cheech and Chong, making them look good meant letting them be exactly who they already were. Two men who didn't hide their lifestyle. Two men who built their comedy around it. And one host smart enough to let authenticity carry the segment without embarrassment. Their appearances weren't scandals. They were statements. Number 3. Peter Fonda, when reality slipped out of focus. By the time Peter Fonda walked onto the stage of The Tonight Show in 1970, he was no longer just an actor. He had become a symbol. The face of a new generation. A living reflection of the countercultural wave that was reshaping music, film, and identity itself. After the explosive success of Easy Rider, Peter Fonda represented freedom, rebellion, and a complete rejection of the old Hollywood rules. That night, America expected insight from a revolutionary star. What they witnessed instead was one of the strangest 5 minutes in late-night television history. From the moment he sat beside Johnny Carson, something felt disconnected. His gaze drifted away from the desk. His attention moved from the studio lights to his own hands, then back again as if he were constantly tuning in and out of the room. When Johnny asked a simple question, Fonda answered part of it, then wandered somewhere else entirely. Behind the scenes, concern rose immediately. Camera operators struggled to keep framing a guest who couldn't hold a steady focus. In the control booth, directors quietly signaled one another as the interview began to unravel in real time. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't excitement. This was disorientation. Johnny adjusted instantly. He abandoned complex questions. He slowed his voice. He offered short prompts designed to keep Peter anchored in the conversation. For brief moments, it worked. Fonda would reconnect, answer clearly, and then drift again. The breaking point came when Johnny asked about upcoming projects, the safest question in any talk show interview. Instead of promoting a film, Peter began describing how time wasn't linear, how reality folded over itself, how everything moved in waves that human minds could barely comprehend. The studio fell silent. Johnny glanced down at his cards and tapped them twice. That was the emergency signal. Within seconds, the interview was cut short and the show went to commercial. When the program returned, Peter Fonda was gone. No explanation. No comment. The next segment began as if nothing unusual had happened. Offstage, there was no outrage. No shouting. Only a quiet, practical decision. This was not a moment to push. Johnny Carson later told producers that everyone deserved an off night. The goal wasn't punishment. It was protection of the guest, the audience, and the integrity of live television. Peter Fonda would eventually return to The Tonight Show in later years and deliver far more conventional interviews. But that night in 1970 became legend. Not for scandal. Not for chaos. But for how quickly reality seemed to tilt, and how calmly Johnny steadied the room. It was the night the counterculture briefly collided with primetime television, and slipped just out of focus. Number 2. Richard Pryor, genius on the edge of the abyss. Richard Pryor was not just a comedian. He was a revelation. A force of truth wrapped in laughter. No one before him had spoken so openly about pain, identity, fear, and survival, and made the world laugh while doing it. When Richard Pryor sat beside Johnny Carson, the audience didn't just watch jokes unfold. They watched a mind operating at full emotional voltage. But that brilliance often came with a cost. By the late 1970s, Pryor's inner battles were no secret. The weight of fame, the pressure to always be sharper than before, and the exhausting demand to outdo his own legends pushed him into dangerous territory. And on more than one Tonight Show appearance, that struggle surfaced under the studio lights. One night in particular began normally. Richard walked out smiling. The crowd erupted. Johnny welcomed him like an old friend. The first few jokes landed clean and powerful. The room relaxed. This was the Pryor everyone loved, fearless, fast, and devastatingly funny. Then something shifted. Midway through a story about his childhood, his rhythm began to fracture. Thoughts overlapped. Sentences trailed off into unexpected directions. His eyes drifted away from Johnny, as if his attention had suddenly moved somewhere only he could see. The audience laughed, but the laughter changed. It became hesitant. Uncertain. Johnny noticed instantly. Without drawing attention to the shift, he leaned in and redirected with a new question. Richard snapped back for a moment, brilliant again, then slowly drifted once more. The pattern repeated in waves. Sharp clarity. Then fog. Then flashes of genius breaking through again. Behind the cameras, the tension was unmistakable. This was no longer just comedy in motion. This was a man balancing on the edge of something fragile. Johnny became more than a host that night. He became a guide. When Richard soared, Johnny gave him space to fly. When he wavered, Johnny stepped in with structure. A short question. A grounding joke. A smooth transition. The audience never saw panic, only flow. But what they were witnessing was quiet crisis management performed at the highest level. The segment ended earlier than planned. Not because it failed, but because Johnny knew exactly when to stop pushing. Later, those close to the show would say that Carson genuinely cared about Richard's well-being. He never mocked him. Never exposed him. He protected him, even when Pryor's own brilliance made that protection difficult. What made Richard Pryor different from others wasn't the presence of struggle. It was the unpredictability. Some nights, his fire produced legendary television. Other nights, it revealed how thin the line was between genius and collapse. That night sat directly on that line. And Johnny held it steady. Number 1. George Carlin, the philosopher who rewrote the rules of comedy. George Carlin was unlike anyone who ever sat across from Johnny Carson. Sharp, fearless, and endlessly curious, he dissected society with the precision of a surgeon and the humor of a natural-born rebel. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a thinker. A commentator. A cultural mirror reflecting everything America tried to ignore. And by the early 1970s, his transformation was complete, from clean-cut performer to the voice of a generation that refused to stay quiet. But with that transformation came a new creative ritual. Carlin often arrived at The Tonight Show in a noticeably relaxed state, shaped by habits that were widely embraced in the counterculture of that era. He didn't hide it. He didn't mask it. If anything, it became part of his onstage aura, a mellow calm blended with explosive brilliance. From the moment he sat beside Johnny, viewers could sense the shift. His eyes carried a distant warmth, as if he were simultaneously in the studio and somewhere far beyond it. His speech was smooth, unhurried, and wrapped in a thoughtful rhythm that felt almost musical. When Johnny asked him a question, Carlin didn't simply answer. He took the idea apart piece by piece, examined it, and rebuilt it into something funnier and smarter than it was before. Johnny understood the dynamic instantly. Rather than guiding the conversation tightly, he loosened the reins. He offered topics instead of questions. He created space instead of structure. Carlin would take a single word or observation and launch into a long, winding reflection that left the audience roaring. Behind the scenes, staff would later say that George was the only guest who could appear visibly altered, and still operate at a level higher than most performers on their very best nights. He was, as many described him, a fully functional creative force. But even with his brilliance, Johnny kept one quiet boundary. Carlin was invited often, more than 130 times, yet he was never asked to guest host the show. Not once. While Johnny respected him deeply, admired his talent, and genuinely enjoyed their interactions, he also understood that Carlin's unpredictable artistic flow didn't fit the responsibility of running a tightly timed, nationally broadcast program. Still, whenever Carlin was on the couch, the atmosphere changed. The audience leaned in. The studio crew relaxed, knowing they were witnessing something unique. Johnny often sat back, almost disappearing behind the desk, simply watching Carlin weave thoughts into comedy with astonishing clarity. Even on nights when his relaxed state was obvious, his intellect burned through it with unmistakable force. What made George Carlin stand apart from every other name on this countdown was simple. He never collapsed. He never unraveled. He never became incoherent. His mind remained razor-sharp, no matter how mellow his energy appeared. His Tonight Show appearances became moments of controlled unpredictability, thoughtful, philosophical, and quietly rebellious. He pushed boundaries while remaining lovable. He challenged social norms without offending the broader audience. He stretched late-night television into new territory, yet always with a smile. Carlin wasn't a problem to manage. He was a wave to ride. And Johnny Carson, perhaps better than anyone else, knew how to steer that wave without ever getting in the way. Carlin didn't just change comedy. He changed the cultural expectations of what comedy could be. And his Tonight Show appearances, relaxed, brilliant, and unforgettable, became a testament to a mind so extraordinary that even on the loosest nights, it remained one of the sharpest in American entertainment history. In the end, these unforgettable moments remind us of a remarkable truth: live television can reveal more about a person, and a time in history, than any script ever could. Johnny Carson didn't just host a show. He navigated a generation in transition, guiding legends through brilliance, chaos, and everything in between. Thank you for joining us on this journey through vintage Hollywood history. If you enjoyed this look back, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the stars.